Hi everyone, welcome to another Table Talk. So in the last day or so, I've had a couple of questions posted on different videos on my YouTube channel asking me about torque roll or folks talking about things that they had going on with their park jets and torque roll. So I thought that would be a good topic for me to do a table talk and discuss sort of my experiences. So essentially, 99.9% of us are hand launching our park jets. So what will happen? And torque roll is essentially like this prop on this airplane is spinning. If I'm looking at the back of the plane, it's spinning this way, so clockwise. So what will happen is, the plane is first leaves your hand and it's only doing a couple miles an hour, but you've got a certain amount of power on. Is that the plane may want to have a tendency to sort of roll the opposite direction to the way the prop's spinning until enough airflow gets going over the wing and the other control surfaces and the stabilizers, so then it can then fly away and get itself stabilized and away you go with your flight. If you find that when you're launching your nose is pitching down or it's pitching up, you may, one of the first things I would check is make sure that you are balanced properly on the CG. If it's a new plane, balance on the CG marked or center of gravity marked on the plans. The other thing to double check is your motor alignment. I always, it's going to be hard for you to maybe see on this plane, but I always make a line down the very center of my back plate on all my park jets. That allows me to align my motor in the yaw axis, or horizontal axis, I guess, in relation to the plane. And the other thing that I do is normally the motor is one of the last things I put in. I'll get my control surfaces in the back here, and I'll kind of look. I know it's going to be, the angle is probably way off, but sort of look down the plane here to make sure that the motor is aligned in the pitch axis. Because what you might be fighting is the motor is slightly out of alignment, and when you launch it, then it's either pulling or pushing your plane a certain way. So if you're experiencing more than just the plane wanting to do this shortly after launch, check the center of gravity and check your motor alignment. Another situation where torque roll sometimes can be a problem is, you're out flying around and you're feeling your oats and you hammer the throttle, with aggressive throttle movement, and the plane might do a torque roll then as well. Especially if you're starting off fairly slow and you want to impress your friends. You hammer the coals to it and the plane might torque roll. That's normally not quite as bad because you're flying and you can compensate a little bit. Torque roll when you launch for most of us is normally what causes us causes us the most stress, and can cause your flight to start off with your heart pounding a little bit more than it should. So based on my experience, what are some things that you can do to reduce torque roll? Obviously, I'm talking about mid-mount prop and slot park jets here. If you've been following my channel for a while, following my journey with my first tail mount park jet, the F-18, FRC Foamy's F-18, that's a different ball of wax. 90+% of park jets plans that you get are with the prop and slot here, and that actually helps reduce torque roll because these the wings can help provide a little bit of balance factor. So some things to consider, when is to start off with is your plane. Normally, your plane and your power combo, your power setup combo. Normally, a shorter wingspan plane, torque roll will be a little bit more present, again, depending on the power setup. I find that, on average, 27-inch wingspans for how I like to fly anyway, those seem to work really well with a wide range of power systems. Like this is a very, very beastie fire-breathing Dragon motor that I have in here now. But also I'll talk about, this is the ParkJet workhorse here, 2212 6 2200 kV. So that's one thing to consider is the airplane size. The other thing is normally, MiGs like this, planes with twin vertical stabilizers that are perpendicular to the wing plate, like a MiG, Sukhoi, F-15, those tend to be a little bit more stable and have less torque roll, just because you've got more surface area here, with two vertical stabilizers to help prevent it from wanting to roll so much. In my experience, single tail ParkJets like maybe F-16, Eurofighter, those may tend to have a little bit more torque roll, unless they have a very large vertical stabilizer. So yeah, so these types tend to have the best stability against torque roll. F-22, T-50, F-18 also a bit better, but sometimes, especially depending on the wind, those can cause you some issues as well with the angles. You get some air doing some funny things. So yeah, especially depending on where you are in your ParkJet journey, twin tail airplanes, MiGs, Sukhois, F-15, that sort of thing, they tend to be a bit more stable that way and have reduced torque roll. Obviously, when you're launching the plane, always, this is just common sense, basic rule of thumb. Do your best to always launch directly into the wind, because if you're launching and you have a crosswind, that can exaggerate torque roll tendency. So always try and launch into the wind. Now you've also got the benefit of that wind going directly over your wing and your control surfaces right off the bat, which will help, until you can, the acceleration of the plane picks up, and then you can have better control. Another thing is to consider is, depending on the plane that you build, where your components are located. There are some planes where the battery, especially because the battery is, tends to be your single most heavy object, can be either laying on top of the wing plate or quite high in relation to the wing plate. And what happens there, so I'll just show you, like on this MiG, if I put my one finger here on the prop nut and one finger on the nose, and then just sort of let it go, it's actually quite neutral, slightly wanting to roll on its belly. Now if the battery and everything was quite high, the tendency for the plane might be to want to do something like this. And then, that can exaggerate the torque roll even more, because as the plane, starts to torque roll a little bit, if the weight, the mass of the plane is really high, it can make it want to roll even further. So just, something to consider. Okay, so we've talked about, sort of what plane can you pick, again, depending on where you're at in your ParkJet journey, to help you with torque roll and motor alignment, CG, that sort of thing. Next is picking the power setup to match your plane and your skill level. So this is a quad racing motor. It's a 2207 3400 kV. It's just even on 3S, which I just released a video flying this plane. It's got an incredible amount of power, well over 2-to-1 thrust to weight ratio, even on 3S. So if I was to put this, this is a Turnigy 2826 2200. The stator is a 2212 2200. This is like the ParkJet workhorse. I did a video discussing this in length, which I'll link down below. I think that this is the best motor to start off with if you're just getting started off in ParkJets, because it's a very versatile motor. You can swing all different kinds of props, and they're very inexpensive and readily available. So these are, and many ParkJets are designed with this power setup in mind. Like we designed, when I was part of NAMC, we designed this MiG-35 and our Su-27. We wanted it to be able to fly really well with the 2212 6 2200 motor. So I'll have videos to those down below, our intro videos, which I flew using a motor like this. So right away, you know, you're going to have reduced, because you have a lower kV motor, you're going to have reduced RPM, which is going to help to reduce the effects of torque roll. Again, it depends on how heavy your plane is. I wouldn't build a plane any heavier, much heavier than about you know, 21, 22 ounces with the battery if you want to get some decent power out of this. I've run, let me see if I can find one here. I've run, this is like a Hobby King knockoff 6x4, sort of a knockoff APC prop. Really good beginner prop. You're going to get plenty of thrust out of this bad boy, and away you go. So, you know, launching, again, if you're with this motor, I tend to launch my planes. Another thing that can help you is to launch. I tend to try and hold my planes if I can. I'm left-handed, which is helpful. I tend to hold my planes sort of here, which is fairly close to the center of gravity. You know, I've never tried it, but I don't hold my airplane out here by the wing and do it that sort of you know, frisbee or discus style. I tend to try and hold them. So you know, I know there's lots of people who launch their airplanes sort of like this. I like to keep my hand as far away from that prop disc as I can. I had a plane bite me one time, and I still have the scars. I took 13 stitches to the end of my finger here. So I like to keep my hand away as much as possible. So the other thing you can do is how you set up your components. I used to fly, when I originally started, there was a lot of people recommending putting the battery to the, you know, as close to the other side. So for example, if this plane is going to torque roll left on launch because the way the prop is spinning, put the battery all the way over to the right if you could. What I found is then, as my skills started to develop, is now your plane is heavy on one side because of where the battery is. And I found that, you know, sometimes turns and rolls especially were asymmetric, like it would, you know, they just wouldn't roll the same, and I didn't feel the plane is as well balanced. So I tend to put my battery right down the center, so the center line, you know, the imaginary center line of the plane sort of dissects my battery down its length so that it's as balanced as possible. But what I do is, you can see, hopefully see here, I've got my speed controller just velcroed on the right hand side. Now this speed controller weighs about 40 grams. I put my receiver over here. My receiver only weighs about 7 or 8 grams. And then I even try and put, you know, the bulk of my servo bundle wire over here on the right hand side. So I don't have, you know, this huge amount of weight from my battery all the way over, but I do have more weight on the right side of the plane than I do on the left side. And the plane still rolls, tends to roll quite nicely. So that's one way you can do it, is put your you know, your speed controller, say your bundle wire bundle, over on this side. You could even put your receiver over on that side if you find that is too much of a problem. But that's one of the ways that I've found that helps to alleviate the torque roll. Okay, so another thing, if you're still finding, you know, you go down in power and are using, you know, say this 2212 2200 kV motor with this two-blade prop, and you're still finding problems, another thing you could try is a three-blade prop. Three-blade props tend to reduce torque roll as well. This is a Master Air Screw 6x4x3 prop. It works exceptionally well with motors like this. I ran for a very long time. I ran this prop with this 2200 motor. It is quite efficient, actually produces a lot more thrust than a two-blade, and it's quite a bit quieter and reduces the torque roll. Now these are not cheap props, and depending on where you are, you may not be able to get them, but you know, have a look around. I know now there are you know, even, you know, quad style props like these ones that I'm using that are, you can get in 6-inch. So If you can't get this or you don't want to spend the money, another thing to do is go down in pitch. So this is a 6x3 prop. This is actually I call it EMP, electric model power, but it's a 6x3 electric prop that I get from RC Timer. You can get these props from Hobby King and also from Banggood. And Banggood, they call them KMP props. Hobby King, they call them TGS props. So I'll have links to those down below. So what you can do is if you go down in pitch, this prop is a tiny bit longer. Tends to be maybe total about an 1/8 of an inch longer than this prop, even though they call it a 6-inch prop. But that's fine because it has a reduced pitch. I should have said this earlier. Sometimes two things that can increase your torque roll is a longer prop and a prop or a prop with higher pitch. Both of those can affect the severity of your torque roll. So if you're flying around with this 6x4 APC style electric prop and you're still finding problems, go, try, and you can get these props. These are actually quite inexpensive. RC Timer, not that I get any kickbacks, but RC Timer I find is where I like to buy them because they come in bundles of 5 and they're cheaper per prop. But anyway, so yeah, go down in pitch. That may help. What you'll find is now your plane will probably accelerate a little faster. You might get a little bit better hole shot, but it won't have, shouldn't have quite as much torque roll. So if you've got to the point where you're able to manage your torque roll, get your airplane flying okay without scaring yourself, and you're still finding an issue that when you hammer the throttle, your plane is torque rolling. Sometimes don't be too concerned if the plane you hammer the throttle and your plane goes a little bit, and then you can compensate and then level it with the controls. If you hammer the throttle and the plane is doing something really aggressive, then what I would suggest is just I know it's not as exciting and as cool, but be a little bit more gradual as you advance your throttle to full throttle, and then you'll get the speed, but the plane will be able to adjust and you'll be able to adjust, rather than hammer the throttle, the plane goes whack and you go whack the other way, and now you're doing one of this and you've just hammered the throttle. You're doing that at full throttle, and unfortunately you could just end up arriving at the crash scene a lot earlier. So yeah, so that's kind of some of the basics. So again, planes with twin tails, it could torque roll can be lessened based on the plane that you select. With twin perpendicular tails, the size, if you go down too small, even if you've reduced the size of your power setup and your prop, you could still have issues with that. So maybe a slightly larger plane. Always double check again, make sure your plane is well balanced on the center of gravity so that that's not causing you an issue. Make sure that your motor is aligned properly, especially when you're first starting off, so that you don't have a misaligned motor that's pushing your plane all over the sky in wonky places. Like I said, think about maybe where you're arranging your components. So put your speed controller and on the opposite side of where your torque roll is causing you issues. That could help as well to reduce it. If you're still having problems, you could before changing the motor, prop down, go down to either a smaller prop or a prop that's lower in pitch. Don't go too low. I mean, do some research and make sure that that you find a prop that's still going to give you reasonably good thrust. You don't want to go from having 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 to 1 thrust to weight ratio to 0.7, and now all of a sudden you launch the plane and you're going to have to try and fly around at full throttle. So do a little bit of research. I have a motor test spreadsheet which I'll link down below. I've tested a lot of motors with a lot of different props, including this 2212 2200. Yeah, so change the prop. Change in length. If you're swinging a 7-inch prop, go down to a shorter prop and or lower pitch. If that's still not helping, then go down to a motor that's has a little bit less kV, a little bit less RPM, and again with maybe a lower pitch prop, and see if that helps you. Launch, always try to do your best, as you always would anyway. Always do your best to try and launch your plane into the wind if there's any wind, so that you get the maximum amount of airflow going over your wings and your control surfaces as quickly as possible to allow the natural stabilization of the plane to help you out. So, and again, if you're, when you're flying around and you're hammering the throttle, and your plane is aggressively torque rolling, then maybe be a bit more gradual on the application of the power, and then you can compensate with a little bit of control input. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I will put this in a series called Beginner Park Jet Flying Series. And so there's some other information in that video series that you might find helpful, if you're just getting started off in the hobby. So check the links down below. Again, I'll have links to other videos and things, and my motor test spreadsheet if you're looking for options for props, motors, things like that for your park jet to help mitigate or reduce torque roll. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.